I want to thank everyone for being part of this event. It's a real pleasure to host events of this type, and a particular pleasure to host this very special event marking the release of Storms of the Inland Sea, Poems of Alzheimer's and Dementia Caregiving. We have the two editors of the anthology with us, Margaret Stawowy and Jim Cokas, and representing the roughly 80 poets who contributed to this book. We have 7 individuals who will talk about it and read their poems that appear in the book. And we have a really wonderful crowd of people today, people still coming in. So it's great to see you all. And again, welcome and thank you for being part of this. My name is Christine Brooks Cody. I'm the founder of Shanti Arts Publishing. We got our start back in 2011, publishing a literary journal at first. And shortly after that, we began publishing books covering a number of topics, poetry, memoir, spirituality, nature, travel, and so forth. It has been a terrific journey these past 11 years, and I'm grateful for the truly remarkable writers and artists that I get to work with. Storms of the Inland Sea is our first poetry anthology. I hope it won't be our last. It's been a real privilege to produce such a fine compilation of work from poets all over the US and Canada. Let me admit a couple people here. Okay. All right. Let me quickly just say a couple things about Zoom. I've muted everybody. So when it is, if you would keep it that way until we get to the questions and discussion portion of today's event, and then you can unmute yourself and take part as you wish. Also, I suggest you keep the chat box open on the right. If you see on the bottom of your screen a little button that says chat, if you click that, you should see a white bar open on the right. And at the bottom of that, you see something that says type a message here. So you can use that to type comments. There already are some comments there, but you can type comments, whatever you want to say, great poem, or I really enjoyed what you said, or I agree, whatever you want to say. And you can also pose questions that we can get back to towards the end. So that's a nice thing to have available during an event like this. I do point out to everyone that the event is being recorded. It will be posted on YouTube tomorrow. And there will be a link on our website. And I'll go ahead and send it to everybody who participated today, everybody who was on our list, in case you want to send it to people who didn't make it, get it handed around to people, get it out there as best you can. Also, just to provide a rough agenda, so we all know what to expect here over the next hour or so. I have just a few more things to say. And then I'm going to turn it over to Jim and Margaret, and they will take it from there. They will, at the appropriate time, read their poems and also introduce the other poets who are with us today. And let's see, who's waiting? Okay, all right, good. Dementia. Dementia strikes often, arbitrarily, and with little warning. And for that reason, it has been called the silent epidemic. But I don't think it's silent at all. I dare say that virtually everyone knows someone who suffers or has suffered from dementia. And that also means we all know people who have provided care for family or friends or patients with dementia. Dementia has physical, psychological, social, and financial impacts, not only for those stricken with the disease, but also for their caregivers, families, and society at large. The book we will talk about today focuses on the caregivers, the spouses, children, family members, and friends who provide essential care and support that can be overwhelming at times and cause great physical, emotional, and financial stress. So, why poetry? All of the arts, visual arts, performing arts, literary arts, attempt to give us a different view into what is happening around us or within us. If you've ever looked at a painting or photograph, or read a poem or heard a poem, listened to a song perhaps, and suddenly you were stopped cold, You felt time stand still. Perhaps you felt your heart expand. And you knew in that moment that somehow everything would be and was okay. That's what art can do. That's what poetry can do. It offers a moment when stillness takes over. And in the throes of caregiving, as many of us know, we need those moments of stillness to go on and on and on. So with that, let me introduce the two editors of the book. First of all, Margaret Stawowy. Margaret grew up on the southwest side of Chicago. As an adult, she moved to San Francisco, then Tokyo and Yokohama, Japan, and then returned to the Bay Area. She is a librarian and an award-winning poet and has served the artistic community in the Bay Area for many years. Margaret was her mother's caregiver for more than 5 years. Her mother lacked financial resources, so when her dementia became aggressive and violent, it proved quite difficult to cobble together needed care within the limits of a piecemeal system. And that's the experience that she writes from. Jim Cokas, if you look at his website, you'll see that he is a creator. He creates work that is photo-based, object-based, and poetry-based. He describes himself as someone who is continually trying to translate what he experiences into something with depth and meaning beyond surface appearance. He has taught photography and graphic design, has had his work widely exhibited, and has completed countless design projects for businesses and organizations. His father, George, suffered from Alzheimer's for over 18 years, and Jim spent a great deal of time during those years trying to bring George some peace and pleasure while writing poems to process and document their time together. So I pass it to Margaret and Jim. Can you unmute? Or do I?
Yeah, Jim's gonna go ahead.
All righty.
I'm going to begin at the beginning here, how this anthology got started. And it started with an idea over 3 years ago with a single poem and a question. The poem was one that Margaret presented at the open mic reading at the Tuolumne Poetry Festival in August of 2019. The poem she read concerned her mother Doris and Margaret's efforts to care for her. It had a special resonance with me because of my experience as a part-time caregiver for my father, George, who suffered for many years from Alzheimer's. I had written a number of poems during that time about my father, a couple of which I'd shared at this same poetry festival, just not that summer of 2019. So now I'm in the audience and there's someone in front on the stage that is reading a poem centered on very similar experiences to my own. I was very moved and very surprised by this. Normally at this festival, the attendees tend to read nature-based poetry. You know, we're in the High Sierra, and that's kind of what it attracts. That's what I normally would read in that context too. But here, here's someone that's reading this poem that is about this incredibly personal, very painful exploration of the difficult choices she had to make, taking care of her mother. So the next day, the poets would read and they would take a break. And during one of the breaks, I asked Margaret this question that I've been thinking about. It goes something like this. If we were both writing poems about caregiving, might there be others doing the same? And if so, how many? And would there be enough perhaps to put together an anthology? And Margaret returned home and set about answering that first question. And she found that there were no books published on this topic or this theme of the experience of caregiving. And so that was answered. But then to answer the two-part question, the second part of this question, we needed to go on a hunt and see if we could find enough poetry to of great quality to make it worth our while to put together an anthology. And so we took out ads in Poets and Writers. I think that was toward the end of 2019, and then 2020 rolls around and we're into COVID. And so I don't think we got a whole lot of responses at first. It took a while to run these ads, and but eventually we started getting some really excellent poems, and we were able to collate them and curate them into what we have today. But there was a point at which, when we were organizing all this work, that Margaret sensed a theme that she could create, a narrative arc or a structure that could hold all these poems together. And I think that's one of the unique aspects of this anthology, and what makes it such a strong work, strong body of work. And I'm going to turn it over to her now to speak about what came after that.
Okay, can everyone hear me? Yes?
Yep.
So when Jim first mentioned the possibility of a poetry anthology, I was just about to dismiss it because I thought, well, somebody has done this before. But what I found out, there were plenty of anthologies with creative writing, particularly on the topic of Alzheimer's, but nothing about the caregiving angle. And that to me was really important. As you realize, it's not news that people are living longer. There's been so many advances in medicine to treat cancer and heart disease. So people are not dying of cancer and heart disease as they once did. And if we're going to be living longer, there's a greater chance that we're going to experience Alzheimer's, dementia, or some kind of cognitive decline. And in the coming years, many of us will be either providing care or receiving care. And people don't want to think about that, but it is coming. It's inescapable. So we wanted to create the kind of book we wished we'd had when we were caregiving. And I'll be honest with you, caregiving for somebody might be in my future again. As I'm saying, it's inescapable. And as we read the submissions, I began to see that there was these themes of water, of the sea, of storms at sea. And I began to understand that this could provide an overarching framework. Many anthologies put work in alpha order according to poet's name, and often that is fine, but I felt that there would be far more strength if we could use this kind of maritime theme for our book. And I want to say there are 84 poets in the book and 121 poems, but I only could choose 7 poets. How could I ever make that decision? Because each poem in this book for me is a winner. So I had to choose by lottery. And as I chose, I began to see that every poem, it didn't matter whose name I picked. I was so happy. But when you read the book, you'll see that every poem in this book deserves its place there. So I want to thank all of the poets who contributed to this book. And I also would like to thank Christine for accepting this project and for her hard work to make this anthology a reality. It's a beautifully conceived edition. And so with thanks to our publisher and our poets, I think let's let the work speak for itself. Our first section of the book is Evening Gray. Evening Gray portends rain at sea. So in this section, there is a realization that a person of close relationship is in the initial stages of a cognitive decline. There might have been suspicions, denials, a wait and see stance, but that time is past. Caregiving has been initiated with its demands and uncertainties and adjustments for both the caregiver and the care receiver. Okay, Jim will introduce our first poet.
Right. Our first poet is Pamela Peté. She's a U.S. veteran, poet, speaker, and business owner. She recently received her MFA in creative writing and performing arts. She was blessed to assist the care of her sister with dementia. This heart-wrenching experience spills onto the page through her poems.
Thank you, Jim. And I want to also thank Christine for accepting this body of work, and Margaret and Jim for choosing my poems. I know you got many, and thank you for allowing my poems to speak to this book. I know a lot of people are going to be blessed by it. My first poem is Leaving Here. Back to the beginning as the present moves so swiftly. She can't take hold, and she tries. Memories tell she can almost touch. It moves just out of reach, thin, vaporous, like a ghost. She is not sure what's there, but is almost sure. She can see it, don't you? She can't share, no one understands, and you can't tell her. She just ate. She would know if she ate. After all, I'm not crazy. Do you think I'm crazy? Where are we going now? You just told me that, didn't you? How many times? How many days? Every day? I don't go to the same place. I've never been here before. I have never seen this doctor before. Don't live here. Haven't seen you in a long time. What happened to my tooth? I don't want to go back. Love hurts. I'm afraid. Afraid of what? I don't know. I'm just afraid. You just don't understand. You're strong, and I'm not like you. I'm sorry. Thank you for putting up with me. Thank you for taking me. Thank you. 1,000 times, thank you. What are your goals? Let me get back to you. Is there anything you want to do? Let me get back to you. What do you want to eat? What do you want to eat? Do you want dessert? What kind of ice cream do you like? I don't know. What do you know? I don't know anything. What do you want? I don't want anything. Well, I want a car. Where will you go? I don't know. Why do you want a car? Don't know. I have to go now. I'll be back tomorrow. Okay. I'll miss you. Remind me. What's your name? And that was my first poem. And my second poem is Mind Erasure. It's not right, I know, to grieve over someone that is still here. Not holding anything you must grip to let go. As she slowly lets go. Let's go. And I know it's not right to cry myself, for myself, not her, although it's her plight. And so selfish, I feel, that it's not me that can't remember only yesteryear, standing still and peeing, not seeing the toilet right there, there, and feeling bad and sad and mad that she can't remember, But I remember, and I'm not ready for her to go. Not ready, not while I'm still here.
Thank you so much, Pamela. When I read that poem, when you submitted it, I knew it had to go in right away. It was a pleasure to hear you read it. Our next section, oh, you're welcome, is also a title, the red sky in the morning also portends a storm at sea. And in this section, we have poems concerning the caregiving of parents. And usually the longer that goes on, at some point, parent-child roles generally reverse. The strength or weakness of those bonds are recognized, as well as the ability to forgive long-standing disagreements or emotional injuries, which may or may not ever be reconciled. But yet for many, there's an unexpected gentleness and even a grace that can emerge.
The poet that's going to lead off this section is Marc Harshman. His poem, Red Anorak, published in 2018, was winner of the Blue Lynx Poetry Prize. He's also co-winner of the 2019 Allen Ginsberg Poetry Award. In 2012, he was appointed 7th Poet Laureate of West Virginia.
Thank you. Before I offer comments regarding the poem itself, let me assert that one of the curses of Alzheimer's and dementia is the frequency with which guilt is left behind for those of us attempting to care. Guilt carried at best awkwardly, and at worst, which is not carried at all, but which in fact can become crippling. Myself, I often think how long I allowed my mother's dementia to go undiagnosed. She had lost my younger brother when he was only 20 to cancer, and she never fully escaped that grief, a grief that became an increasingly deep depression, and which only after the fact that I realized it very effectively masked the dementia that was already beginning to take hold of her. The poem itself, Inland Sea, has these words: she did not want me to see. Though not exactly the heart of the poem, and certainly not the most poetic of phrases, those first 7 words, she did not want me to see, say a world about my mother and myself. She did not want me to see. She did not want me to see, nor anyone else for that matter. We were always to present our best selves, and when she began to slip into the other world of dementia, she was ever more fierce about this, even though she did not seem to know any such slippage was occurring. She instinctively knew that she did not want me or anyone else to see, did not want us to see anything less than the best of her. I took a lot of license with the truth in this poem. I make myself young when the poem says that someone told me that my father was leaving. He did, but I was no longer young when that happened. And it was she that left him, though perhaps with understandable reasons, another story. And though she did have hair that was night black with a silver sweep, it had been all silvery gray for years before her departure. I love you, I tell her, just in case. Those words in the poem, there's the real heart of it. And perhaps too, the heart of this project, trying to say just that, some words of love, to speak to that deep fondness when the disease has taken our loved one on to some distant shore where a language is spoken for which none of us here have the lexicon. Inland Sea. She did not want me to see her riding her sad whales through the green waves. She told me this as I helped her sop up the mess. The bathtub had overflowed again. It was hard to understand, and I had lots of questions. Soon, though, Mother wasn't listening. It happened a lot, not listening. It happened too often. Tidal waves of water and questions. Someone told me that my father was leaving her. He is always leaving, I say. I love you, I tell her, just in case. Still, she isn't listening, despite the empty room, the dry floor. I say those words again and again. I love. Her hair is night black with a silver sweep where the moon's knife once slashed it. Perhaps she had dreams bigger than her heart could manage. I decided it was funny how father could have been the right man, but at the wrong time. Not tragic or bad, but funny. I was big on love in those days. Funny allowed me to love him too. And I came to learn that that wrong time provided my only passage through here. Still, I would have wished better things for her. Bankruptcy, alcohol, violent silences stood always between them and in front of me all these years, just waiting for me to find my way round. I keep repeating what I'd said about love. She continues to sit in the bath. The listening has been over a long time now. Still, I'm patient, have my sponge ready, and those I always have ready too, to have them returned.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Marc. And it's actually Marc's poem, Inland Sea, that inspired the title of our anthology. So thank you for that as well.
Okay, now it's my pleasure to jump in and introduce my hardworking co-editor, Margaret Stawowy. Margaret was her mother's caregiver for 5 years. As co-editor, she dedicates this book to her mother, Doris. Sometimes Margaret is lucky enough to have her work accepted in a publication. Sometimes, when she is really lucky, she wins an award for a poem. That makes her very happy. And I'm going to tack something on to here. I want to add here my observation that luck has much less to do with it than talent. So take it away.
Thank you so much, Jim. My poem you can find on page 57. It's called Drugging My Mother. And admittedly, it is a dark poem, but I wanted to include something like this because I wanted caregivers who are having difficulties and challenges that are not easily fixed to see and experience with, this kind of level of difficulty. My mother, she's doing great for a long time, but then the falls came and that put her in the hospital and then in skilled nursing facilities for rehabilitation. And that took her out of her routine and her dementia skyrocketed. She also got a C. diff infection, which was quite serious. And if you're a caregiver, you know that those kind of infections can really affect behavior. So my mother was getting very agitated, even violent. And to get her the care she needed, we had to stabilize her, and the hospice gave me an array of pharmaceuticals, and we didn't know how these were going to exactly affect her, but it was my job to administer them. And out of that came this poem, Drugging My Mother. My hand shook when I took the bag of drugs delivered that night. The moon was red. My mother's gut clenched, bred an infection, dispersed invasive seeds of rage. In her brain, a chainsaw shredded reason to ribbons, incited limbs to insurrection. Hospice gave clear directions. Don't worry about tomorrow, today. But that day, electrons in her head split atomic bonds of mother, daughter. I could hide knives, scissors, but not my fear, which she could smell clearly. Lorazepam, Seroquel, haloperidol. I ferried the dark waters of my mother, tossed futile chemicals into her currents. Thank you. And now it is my distinct pleasure to introduce our next poet, who is Jim Cokas. As Christine mentioned before, Jim is an artist whose work involves visual imagery as well as poetry. His father, George, suffered for over 18 years with Alzheimer's. Jim spent a great deal of time trying to bring George some peace and pleasure while writing poems to process and document their time together. And thank you so much, Jim, for suggesting the idea of this anthology. Oh, and Jim's work can be found on pages 78 and 118.
Thank you, Margaret. This first poem is titled Gift. And I wrote this poem during a period of time in the caregiving for my father when he was living at a nearby residential care facility. A really wonderful family managed that home. I would go visit him several times a week and often take him to a nearby park. This poem came from one of those outings. For me, it challenges my assumptions about the nature of giving and receiving. Gift. My father can't go to the forest, so I conjure one, pointing to a small grove of trees in the park where we're sitting. See over there, behind those trees, that's where the trail begins. We used to carry our packs up steep slopes to lakes full of trout and nap on granite slabs at the end of the day. Remember? He smiles, shaking his head. A flock of birds fly over, too fast for him to notice, so I bring them to his ear, cooing softly, hoping he'll remember the pigeons he kept as a stranger, as a teenager, and the joy he knew releasing them to fly for a day. Nearby, a small boy sits in his swing while his mother pushes him into great arcs of joy. He smiles and waves to my father, who knows to do the same. He needs no help to remember what to do, how to respond, how to accept a pure gesture. The next poem, second poem, is on page 118. It's titled The Shave, and this relates to the tasks that pretty much almost all caregivers are called upon to do. In my case, it was some mundane tasks like bathing or dressing or shaving, acts that we all do without much thought. But my father could not pull from his memory the steps necessary to shower or shave himself. So I had to rely on something else. The shave. Holding out my left hand, I dispense a small billowing cloud into its center. Tilting my father's head a little, dipping into the pure white puff, I begin to work it into his coarse gray stubble. After some careful deliberation on the starting point, I pull the razor across his slack cheek, but without tension. The blade stutters and skips. This will not work. So I ask him, show him how to make a face. See like this, my chin jutting forward and up like the bow of a ship. He copies my form and the razor glides through the white foam. Next, we steer the ship left and then right, moving across an ocean of loss until we are done. My father touches his cheek and smiles at the renewed smoothness of his face. And I realize that sometimes memory is less about the act and more about trust. What someone knows when they know nothing else.
Thank you again, Jim, for that fine work. Our next section is called Ring Around the Moon. And these poems address the overwhelming realities of losing a partner, not to death, but to forms of dementia. Again, the strength or weakness of the relationship comes under examination as spouses and partners endure the lonely and unfamiliar territories of caregiving.
So the poet for this section is Wanda Praisner. Wanda was her husband's caregiver for 5 devastating years, losing part of herself along the way. 2 decisions that had to be made. One, to find part-time help when he no longer could be left alone, and 2, to take him to a nursing home when she could no longer care for him. More devastating still, living without him. Wanda, are you there?
Christine, is Wanda with us here? Okay, what should we do? Maybe Wanda.
Hear me?
Yes, okay, there she
Okay.
is.
I was not muted on my side. Now I am. That helped. Yes, my 2 poems in this beautiful anthology speak to the 2 most difficult decisions I had to make as my husband's caregiver. The first one is page 101. Picking a bouquet of Russian olive. Their spicy, sweet fragrance reaches me before I'm at the empty lot. 2 weeks early. They usually bloom in May. I snap branches off these invasive trees, being careful of thorns. Our home will smell like Polynesia. Walking back, I notice a pair of ladybugs mating on one of the centimeter or so sized leaves. The one on top has 10 spots and is redder than the one underneath, more orange, mostly hidden. At our drive, my husband rests on a garden bench. He's forgotten to mow the lawn. This morning, he went outside to go home. PJs, shoes, a National Geographic underarm. I said he should shower. Breakfast was ready. Where's the shower? He asked. And I showed him, told him he was home. Last night, despite his twitchings and bad dreams, he reached for me, remembered love. And the second one is page 135, Changing Season. 7 days since I delivered you to the nursing home, our home left forever, and you in your dementia more fortunate than I in not knowing. A house empty of you, my love. Now I must drive to where you are. When not visiting you, I erase traces, reminders of the almost unbearable years I cared for you. When I gave myself in the hope you might get well. Leaves fall, V's of geese airborne to an elsewhere. Gone, boxes of Depends, rubber gloves, disinfectant wipes, cans of Lysol. Your walker, wheelchair. In 1 week's time, you went downhill, unable to walk, falling every day. The need to call neighbors, workmen repairing the chimney, the police. I put back hall rugs, unlock windows, unbolt doors, bring out scissors and nail clippers from hiding places, remove plastic pads from our bed, return the spread and pillow shams, the doll you once bought me. It's quiet, quiet as the garden without the summer songbirds. Lulled by all the years we were given, somehow I didn't prepare for the season. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Wanda. To hear this work read in your voice is, I've been with the words on the page, but to hear you read it aloud, it was very moving. Thank you. Our next section is called Walk on Water, which addresses the nearly impossible demands of day in, day out caregiving, such as feeding, toileting, grooming, comforting, and often just being there.
Therese Halscheid's father suffered from brain damage during heart surgery when she was just 14. Having a father with active dementia was traumatic, which resulted in her starving herself. This was 1973 when words like Alzheimer's and anorexia were unknown. Her poems offer a glimpse into their paired illness. She and her mother cared for him for almost 30 years. Therese?
Okay.
Grace, there she is.
All right. Thank you so much. This is such a moving reading, and thanks to the editors and the publisher. My first poem is My Father's Cereal, and it's on page 117. My Father's Cereal. We wake on dry land where the sun works brilliant, until a bib is tied about my father's neck. A bowl is placed high upon books, and the largest spoon in the house is set in his hand between two crooked fingers. There is my mother creating this daily scene of events, pouring Cheerios into his bowl, adding the white milk before guiding my father's spoon down into it. She leaves the room then, and there is only myself sitting across from him. I have my own bowl, but do nothing about it. We are a pair of sorts, I refuse how his face is unreadable, that his brain is damaged enough to believe he is eating, and he is blind to the point where he thinks I look fine. When we move as slow water moves, barely along because nothing can save us. His spoon floats through air, is empty, is treading in space. My thoughts are all garbled as if made of liquid. We remain this way, my father and I, as if underwater. The Cheerios turn soggy, inflating like inner tubes. But it is too late. Soon we will drown in this moment. Day will begin, and there will only be the strange surfacing of our tragic lives. The second poem is called The Walk Home, and it's on page 122. And just to preface, my mother tried to work after my father came home from the hospital with brain damage, and she would drop my father off at my aunt's house down the street. And it was my job to walk him home after school. And that whole thing became so traumatic for all of us that my mother had to stop working and care for him full time. So this is called The Walk Home. Each day the curtains part from each home we pass. And without clearly seeing them, I can sense the widening eyes of mothers. I can feel their thoughts through the windows. And it is all about the way my father and I look to them. It is about it being late spring and the fact that he and I wear woolen coats and gloves as we are always cold, our lives so dark, not even the sun can save us. It is about my looking less than human, brittle-boned, slumped, I am that thin. And certainly it is the sight of my father beside me, who is near blind and brain damaged, someone behaving in ways that one might find in mental wards. Sometimes their curtains are torn far apart so fast, as if fate landed an illusion, something that never should be, and nothing appears real except for their manicured lawns and the distance the sidewalks allow, each afternoon at 3, as we shuffle past this place of groomed grass and the scent of immediate flowers. Above us are always the overhanging trees whose blossoming leaves spread glorious and are just like a wedding arbor. So perfect, I think, for this really is what we are married to. This aisle, this arm-in-arm walk after school from my aunt's house to ours. This street, like an obvious map of us, pointing things out that we cannot escape.
Therese, thank you so much. I think that your contributions add a very unique angle. Most of us as caregivers, we're adults, but to have the input of somebody who provided care as a child, yeah, that is powerful, and it really made a contribution to the anthology. I thank you. And with that, I will launch into the next section, which is called Salvage. There comes a point when cognitive decline reaches a stage and one person just can't do it anymore without suffering their own negative health consequences. Help could be in the form of residential care or assisted living or a skilled nursing facility. And a lot of caregivers have this feeling of guilt, betrayal, failure. And still, though, they are caregivers because they are the ones that will be called upon to provide context for their care receivers in this new and often very confusing situation.
The poet in this next section is Leslie Gerber. He was born in Brooklyn in 1943 and graduated from Brooklyn College. He began writing poetry in 1999 and was greatly encouraged by his wife, a full-time professional writer. During her decade of decline into dementia, he wrote many poems about their experiences, published after she died as Losing Tara.
My first poem, I believe, is Erosion on page 105. You told me once soaking the porcelain lining of your antique bathtub would damage it. After every bath, you would wipe it carefully with your towel, a task now left to me, the one who remembers things. Strange to think that water hurt something meant to contain it, the way I, meant to contain your love, am now eroding. My next two poems are on pages 149 and 150. What we want. What I want is for her to rise and walk, to say my name, to say her name. What she wants is another spoonful of fruit. What I want is to sit by the fire on a cold Cape Cod night, wind yelling outside, and talk about the movie we just saw, how the kids are doing, what's in today's paper. What she wants is to get her face away from my kiss, although she might want the next one. I want to take her away from this place where smiling women in purple shirts are patiently teaching her to walk again. She wants them to leave her alone. I do not know what I want anymore. So much is gone that I don't know what to miss first. She misses things too, but not knowing what they are seems to make it easier. Alone. Late at night, lying in bed with no company except my dog and my hand, I embrace this moment as a figure of speech for my present. My wife lies in an electric bed a few miles away, pissing into a tube and saying no to almost everything. The manuals I've read on how to live somehow omitted this chapter. When hope is on vacation, you have to rely on your own diminished resources. Fun is a strange idea. Joy lives on the moon. But the hand that feels so damn sorry for itself is still moving this pen. And my last two poems are on pages 165 and 166. Limits. We defied time for a long time. I would have kissed you as long as I could. When you brought your wide open love, neither of us thought of limits. Maybe you knew the rules for the duration of happiness. Maybe that was why you lied about your age. I was so surprised that day in the hospital when I saw your license. Your only lie. I still thought it was till death do us part. But sometimes death takes only part of us at first. If I had known, I could have seen all those years and then be forced to see you fade away. How long I'd have to be alone while you looked on with vacant eyes, grasping for words you used to know. Would I have taken the deal? You were so funny, your slim legs so long, your heart so near the surface. How could I have resisted you? I, who now clean and mourn. Saint Tara. Behind the mask, her eyes burn, memory shredded like the confetti Bible. What day is it today? A minute later, what day is it today? The dogs have eaten, or have they? Look for their bowl, smiling in the sink. I have to go to the bank, she says. I need to buy some money. Knobs have grown teeth, stalks have sharp edges, dials tell lies, the mail is full of danger. I read her old poems to her. That's good, she says. Did I write that? Are you sure? Dearest blessed Saint Tara of the broken memory, whose brilliance once cast shadows on the moon, who made a roomful laugh until they hurt, now cries in confusion, rages against herself, cannot accept her loss. Rest peacefully, my sweet. Enjoy the sun and the food your weary lover offers you in lieu of tears. Thank you.
Leslie, I want to tell you how much I loved reading your book, Losing Tara. It is amazing. So, folks, it's a wonderful book. You might want to check that out. Okay,
Thank you.
you're welcome. Our next section is salt. Salt is what remains when death is imminent or has occurred. How can a person who has been so deeply marked by the caregiving experience deal with grief, not only for the person receiving care, but for their acquired identity as caregiver?
For the section salt, we're going to hear from Dane Cervine, excuse me. Dane's recent books include The World is God's Language, published by 16 Rivers Press, and Earth is a Fickle Dancer by Main Street Rag. Poems in this anthology originate from his former experience working in a long-term care facility. Dane lives in Santa Cruz, California, where he maintains a small therapy practice. Dane?
Thank you, Jim. Thank you. And in addition to Margaret and Christine, I just wanted to appreciate all of us readers and poets. It's in the communal aspect of holding these things that I think we get through. You know, these two small prose poems that I'll read, the first one is on page 158, Another Kind of Truth. This was a personal witnessing of our beloved aunt, whose family surrounded her through a long and brutal decline by entering with tenderness and humor her idiosyncratic language that she found, perhaps not unlike the poet. Another Kind of Truth. Aunt Suzanne died in the early morning, the last stage of Alzheimer's, ending with a sigh. Her gray matter resting now after the kaleidoscopic firing of random neurons, memories, the confused details of a life blurring indiscriminately, where a banana is indeed a hammer or a husband, and death another kind of living. Where a banana is indeed a hammer or a husband, and death another kind of living. The second small prose poem is on called Union on page 91. And while I've worked in different kinds of facilities over the years, I fell in love with this particular couple that lived together in a room in a long-term care facility. It's called Union. They were married, both stricken with Alzheimer's, living together in one room at Harbor Hills. They would constantly try on clothes. He a skirt, she his shirt. Often his pants would end up on her arms. Her shoes fit snugly over both his hands. What tragic grace at the end of life together, so determined to fit each inside the other. And I have to say, not unlike my 1.5-year-old grandchild who engages in some of those kinds of same attempts, very tender. I just wanted to mention that this whole series of small prose poems that has other, I have other ones of a similar nature with my mother and with my other family members in the latest book from 16 Rivers Press. So feel free to look it up. And thank you again for listening, and I'm enjoying being with all of you.
Thank you so much, Dane, for those wonderful poems. Our next section is also the final section, and there is only one poem in this section. It's called Sweet and Blue, the section name that is. And this final poem is a perfect springboard that breaks through the boundaries of the last page and carries us, as our next poet would say, into the present.
Barbara Hill is our final poet in the anthology, as Margaret just mentioned. She's a poet and interfaith minister from Stonington, Connecticut. Her book, A Few Sharp and Glamorous Words, was published in 2019. She has worked as a caregiver for family members and others with dementia. Her poem, Hyacinths, expresses both the distress of memory loss and the welcome relief of beauty in the present moment. Barbara.
Okay.
Barbara's muted.
Okay. Barbara, can you please unmute?
There, I got it. Sorry.
Okay.
Unintended drama. Hi, everybody. I'm talking to you from Pawcatuck, Connecticut, which is part of Stonington, a town in the southeast corner of the state, over by Rhode Island on the Long Island Sound. I'm honored to have my work in this collection. Thank you, Margaret, Jim, and Christine. It's a beautiful book, and I hope it finds its way into many rooms, especially those where someone is alone and grieving, exhausted and frustrated from giving and giving. I worked as a paid caregiver for different people and then became one of my dad's caregivers. Eventually, he lost his words, no being the last one to go. But before that, he often spoke of needing a witness. Dad was a famously silent man who liked being alone and didn't like to ask for help, but now he needed it. Witness was the word he used. May we all have a witness when we need one. This book is a witness for all of us. Oh. So the poem is from one of my clients called Hyacinths. This is just to say that I've taken 6 of your blue hyacinths to Louise at Piper Shores. I thought you wouldn't mind. She probably won't remember who I am, and she'll be distressed. But the hyacinths will move us beyond the moment of failed memory into the present, which is sweet and blue and lasts forever.
Oh, thank you, Barbara. That, for me, was the perfect poem to conclude the anthology. And Christine, do we have time for question and answer?
I think we have a few minutes. I hope all of you have been looking at the comments. They're absolutely wonderful to read, the thank yous. This book is a witness for all of us. Yes, indeed. I too, this is to Dane, I too love union. Dane, I love union. What a story. Death, another kind of living. Oh, Leslie, so much is gone that I don't know what to miss first. Thank you for expressing my heart in those words. Such powerful endings. I'm just glancing through them. Take a minute and do look through all the comments. And I must also agree with something Margaret said earlier, how incredibly powerful it is to hear the poets reading their own work. Like Margaret, you know, I looked at these words for a long time. Probably not as carefully as Margaret, but I certainly looked at them for a while, and it's a whole different experience to hear them read by the poet who wrote them. So this has really been a remarkable hour, and I'm grateful to all of you for being here. We do have a few minutes, so if anyone has a question or wants to make a comment, if you would just unmute yourself, and we'll see how it goes.
I do see a question here in the comment section by Marcia D. to everyone. Can I read that, Christine?
Sure.
Okay. It says, I am curious whether as you write, you are writing onto the page for yourself, or whether you are thinking of eventual audience or community such as us.
And I assume anyone who wants to step forward, any of the poets who want to respond to that?
Pamela, please.
Let's go.
When I was writing those poems, my sister was alive, and it was a coping mechanism to help with my patience with her. And the poems wanted to be written. They just spoke. I have so many, and they just spoke as I was tending to her, as we were singing songs, or they just, not necessarily for an audience, but I do believe all poems do have an audience. But the poems just came. They just used me as a vehicle.
Yes, I agree, Pamela. We're a vessel. They just want to be alive and to originate. Yes, absolutely.
I would add that those two functions of the poem for myself or for an audience aren't really as different as you might think they are. I would not say I was doing one or the other.
And I'll just add that, you know, for years I couldn't write about it. So it was really cathartic at a very late time in my life. I guess I started to write about my father when I was in my 30s and 40s. I was writing about him. So I was doing it as a review. I did it after his death, as a review to, it all surfaced then. So it's interesting when the poems come for different writers. Sometimes they come at the time of the caregiving, and then sometimes later.
I want to add that one of our poets, Yvonne Postel, she was caring for her husband, Jack, and she had no time to write poetry, but she kept a journal. And so after her husband passed, she took the journal and she started crafting poems. So it gave her a chance to process all of the, very deep experience she had as a caregiver.
Well, I can speak for a sec. When I was writing the poems, the two that I read and all the others, they were written and really intended not for anyone else in a sense. I mean, later on I saw that maybe they'd have some value that way, but for the most part, I was writing as a means of processing and sort of capturing or documenting what I was seeing, feeling, experiencing at the time. So this opportunity that would never have happened without Margaret's intense efforts, that really, I can't even express my gratitude. It's wonderful. Thank you, Margaret.
Thank you. When we're drafting poems, I was also I was processing what had happened. And, the first drafts that just came out, of course, when you're, a poet, you want the poem to be as good as it possibly can be. And sometimes I'll just leave a poem to sit, but if I want to put it out there, I want to make it as fine a poem, as finely crafted a poem as I can. And often that's the stage where, I'm going to be really doing very intense edits and second looks at the poem. So in the initial stages of poem creation, I'm just trying to deal with my feelings or what happened. Yeah. And some of the other part about the audience only comes later. I couldn't, if I'm thinking about an audience, I just don't feel I personally can be authentic in my first stabs at it. Thank you for that question.
I think that's what the audience responds to is the integrity of the poem, the realness of the poem. And I can't find it here quickly, but someone put a comment earlier that other people very often do not understand what caregivers go through. And this person said, she's tries and tries and tries to not talk about it, even though it's something she does want to talk about. And perhaps, again, the gift of this book is to share those experiences and to hook into other people's experiences, to support other caregivers in what they're going through. So it has been written for an audience, even though it started as a way to process.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts or questions?
I just want to add to what everybody's saying, which I kind of agree with it all, that at the beginning, writing these things was an absolute survival mechanism for my, mental stability, but it felt almost for my bodily health. It was like, it was the thing that kind of held me together in a certain way when nothing else was held together much.
Well said.
Anybody else? Comments or questions?
Well, everybody was just so wonderful, and again, I want to thank all you, Christine and Margaret and Jim, because being in this book means so much to me. But I want to talk about Marc Harshman's comments about how his poetry contained some fictions, but not really fictions. He talked about his father, someone told him his father left. He made it sound as if he were younger. And I found it just so freeing and liberating, because in my own writing, when I'm writing about my mother, she did not have, I don't know what an image that was, the black hair, with the silver streak from the moon's knife. But there are ways I remember her that, all those different mamas that I had, just nesting dolls of mamas. And so when we're writing this, I do think that when we're writing a poem, we're going in and out of time, especially when it's in this kind of traumatic thing. So that's all, just a thought about that.
Thank you.
Thank
That
you.
was well said.
I find that fictionalizing part of that actually allowed me to draw closer to a truth. And I think you understand that. Thank you.
This is a terrific exchange. Anyone else? Thoughts or comments?
May I?
Please.
I just want to say that I love your work. I love the poetry, and I feel so grateful to all of you to be a part of this work. And I want to say that I shared it with caregivers in my community as part of a workshop, and they loved the work, and it brought out so many feelings in them, and an ability to share their feelings with those that you had expressed. I hope you'll be able to do that with other caregiver groups. It's a valuable, valuable piece of work. Thank you.
Nancy, that's a great segue into like what's next for the anthology. Of course, you did that workshop using anthology poems as examples, and Jim and I are also planning a workshop to be presented in an academic setting of narrative medicine, which is kind of a new field of medical providing care to patients. And we hope that our contributors and their fans will introduce the book to local organizations that gave them support in caregiving. And we hope that everyone who's here today will, we'd appreciate your help in spreading the word about this anthology. So thanks, Nancy, for bringing up that comment.
Okay, shall I? Oh, Jim, did you want to say anything at the end here, or should I go ahead?
I think you can close it out. Thank you.
All right. Well, I want to echo what Margaret is saying, that this event really has been an invitation. It's an invitation to spread the word, if you will, about this important book, this important resource for caregivers. And again, just looking through the comments, you can see what an important resource this really is. I think we'd like to challenge each of you to reach out to people you know, who are caregivers, those who lead support groups for caregivers, health professionals who work with dementia patients, people who write blogs about healthcare, people who do journalism related to healthcare and dementia, people in the media, people in your community, anyone who might be interested that you can think of, please reach out and make them aware of this book. If you or someone that you know is interested in doing a Zoom event and maybe do not have a Zoom account, I am more than happy to host it for you on our account. Just let me know. I'll help in any way that I can. So with that, I think many thanks to all of you who were here. This truly was, it met all of my expectations that this would be a moving and powerful event. And it certainly has been, to listen to the words of the poets and the comments we've heard and the comments we can read. This has really been a wonderful experience. So thanks to all of you who attended. Many thanks to the poets who read today. Deep, deep thanks to Margaret and to Jim for getting all of this started in the first place and bringing this to my awareness. And it surely will help many, many people. So thank you and have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Christine.
Thank you.